What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com down there. You know, by now we like magic. Today, I've got a super low budget deck for you. It's only going to cost you about $8. And like I said at the end of the last video, this deck has actually given me some really good results over testing. I've beaten a lot of decks that I had no business beating with this deck. This is green-black aggro. And before, by the way, I go into these one-drops, I just want to point this out real quick. Sort of a sidebar about mass removal right now. There's actually a good bit of mass removal in the format, a lot of it at 3 mana, and all of it can blow us away. Radiant Flames, Kozilek's Return, and Flame Tendrils all cost 3, plus there's Fumigate, which some decks also play. Now, we're way up under Fumigate, and we can usually win before it, so Fumigate I'm not as worried about as the 3 mana removal that can totally devastate us before we really get a chance. But the good news there is that you really don't see that many decks that play them. Most Delirium decks don't play Flame Tendrils main deck, and some of them don't even play it in the sideboard. Mostly because Control is big in the format right now. Also, Radiant Flames, you don't see that as often as you used to anymore, and Kozilek's Return is probably the most popular, but you still, honestly, don't see it that much. Right now, Green-Black Delirium is big, and the Control decks are big, but the Control decks don't play any creatures, so they don't play Kozilek's Return because there's no way of flashing it back for 5 damage. So you really don't see that much mass removal right now, especially with Control being as big as it is. People don't want a dead card like Flame Tendrils in their hand. So right now, mass removal really kind of on the decline, giving a deck with a bunch of one-drops a really good chance. So let's take a look at them. We're going to play 4 copies of Night Market Lookout, 4 copies of Reaver Drone, 4 Kessig Prowler, and a playset of Scythe Leopards. Playset of all of these. Honestly, I just want as many one-drops as we can fit in here so we can do a bunch of damage very quickly. Night Market Lookout. A lot of you have been telling me in the comments this is a fine card, and I've gotten a chance to play with it now. Turns out, it's a fine card. You know, it pretty much guarantees a point of damage every time it swings in, which means that it's kind of a 2-power creature in a way. And if we were playing things like Smuggler's Copter, this would be an awesome pilot. You know, whenever it crews a creature, you get a point of damage. That's pretty cool. Reaver Drone, we don't have any other colorless creatures, so we're going to be taking the point of damage. But we don't care. You know, we could play Suicide Black, basically. If you're old enough to remember that deck, give me a shout out in the comments. You know, it was a deck that just played things like Carnophage that, you know, did you damage, but it was okay because the creature itself was a really good deal. I look at Reaver Drone the exact same way, and I really don't care about taking the point of damage because I want the game to be over before it really matters. So Reaver Drone, yeah, definitely. I'll play a Savannah Lions that hits us for a point every turn, especially in a budget deck. 4 copies of Kessig Prowler. This is really the best one-drop in the deck if we can get 5 mana on the battlefield because it really becomes the biggest creature in the entire list. So definitely play the Kessig Prowlers. And then Scythe Leopard is sort of the weakest of these, but still it makes, you know, land drops that you get on turn 4 or 5 that would otherwise be fairly dead into really good drops. You know, you get a +1/+1 to your Scythe Leopard, and we've got another landfall creature too. So I like Scythe Leopard because it's, you know, the first 2 or 3 turns of the game it's theoretically always got 2 power and 2 toughness. And then later on in the game, it makes those lands into not so bad draws. The rest of the creatures are all 2-drops. There's 4 copies of Noose Constrictor and 3 copies of Snapping Gnarlid. Snapping Gnarlid, our other landfall creature, and a lot like Scythe Leopard, you know, until turn 4, you know, theoretically and ideally. Until turn 4, it's usually going to be a 3-power creature, and a 2-mana 3-power creature is a pretty darn good deal. So Snapping Gnarlid is not bad for 5 cents. And then Noose Constrictor is pretty freaking hot, you know. We're not playing too much that has madness. There's 2 copies of Alms of the Vein in the deck, in the main deck, and then 2 more in the sideboard. But it's the only way we have of discarding cards, so I didn't want to go overboard with madness stuff. But Noose Constrictor is just good for a bunch of different reasons. Not only is it a really aggressive creature that can get really big, really quick, threaten to finish off the opponent when it attacks, but also it's not a terrible blocker. Now, if you're blocking with Noose Constrictor, you're probably not doing something right, or conversely, your opponent has a Smuggler's Copter out, which Noose Constrictor is pretty good against. We do have to lose a card and, you know, trade, but still, we can take out a Copter main deck with a Noose Constrictor. That's not bad. But mostly it's in there because it has the most potential to become huge out of nowhere and just in the game if it goes unchecked. You know, we're also playing some spells in the deck. It's a game of Magic. We should probably play some spells. So let me show you those. A lot of them are pump spells in this really fast aggro deck. But a lot of the quick pump spells in this format do other stuff, so that's cool too. Let me show them to you right now. We're going to play 4 copies of Blossoming Defense, 3 copies of Unnatural Endurance, and 4 copies of Larger Than Life in the sort of pump spell suite here. Now, Unnatural Endurance is pretty good. It's a lot like Blossoming Defense. You know, it only gives you the 2 power and not the 2 toughness, so you'll mostly use it, at least the boost on it, to get through for more damage on small creatures. That's good. We want that. But it also has that regenerate clause. Certain removal spells it can basically counter. So that's cool if they want to, you know, cast a murder on one of your guys, and you can always Unnatural Endurance and regenerate the creature. That is good. Same thing with Blossoming Defense, which is a much better card, to be honest with you. But Unnatural Endurance is, I think, good enough as a pump spell to make it into the deck, and it's really cheap. But Blossoming Defense I'd rather play all day, and that's why we're playing the playset. This saves creatures from removal as well, which, you know, having 7 cards that protect creatures is very important in this format right now. Blossoming Defense also provides a 2 power and 2 toughness, in this case, boost, meaning again that we can get through for more damage in combat. If they block a guy, then we can surprise them with Blossoming Defense and keep our dude kill theirs. Blossoming Defense has a lot of different applications right now, and it's really good in an aggro deck. And Larger Than Life may not be instant speed, which is really the worst part of the card, but it's still 2 mana for a +4/+4 bonus, which is just crazy. On a naked board, you know, if you've got a couple of creatures and your opponent doesn't have anything, then a Larger Than Life can really end up doing a bunch of damage. Like, you can hit them for 8 or 9 in one turn pretty easily if you play a Larger Than Life in the very early game. And yeah, sometimes they'll play removal on top of the Larger Than Life on the stack, and you'll basically get 2 for 1. But I do think that it's good enough, you know, 2 mana +4/+4. That is good enough to play a playset in the deck. Let's finish off the spells here. We're going to play 3 copies of Dead Weight and 2 copies of Alms of the Vein, and that is the entire main deck, believe it or not. Dead Weight is just very, very cheap. It only costs the 1 mana, and it either clears creatures off the board in the early game so that we can get through against other aggro decks, or it makes bigger creatures smaller and more likely to, you know, just block and die as opposed to block and trade, or, you know, block and kill or whatever. So I like Dead Weight a lot, mostly because of how cheap it is, and because it's especially good in the early game, which is when we want to get a bunch of damage through against other aggro. So you could play like Grasp of Darkness or something, but I'd rather play Dead Weight in this slot, honestly. And then Alms of the Vein, which you could play the 4 of, but I don't want to go crazy on Madness stuff. But it is pretty good, you know, reach at the end of the game if you just need to deal a few more damage. And they've gotten to the point where they've stabilized and you can't really get through for combat damage anymore. Alms of the Vein can sometimes finish the game off. And against other aggro, it can hit them in the face, give you 3 life back, and sort of help you win the damage race. There's 21 lands in this deck, and they're all basic lands. There they are. Just a little bit more forest and swamps because we got a little bit more green cards and black cards. That's it. This will totally suffice, I promise you. You know, if you want to, you could put some tap lands and dual lands in there, but I really, in this deck, do not want lands that come into play tap, so I'm fine with this. Here's the sideboard right here. Everything's fairly self-explanatory. Sinister Concoction can take out Emrakul. That's very, 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 very important. And it also works with the other Alms of the Vein that are in the board here too. You know, there's Natural State and Appetite for the Unnatural, both ways of taking out artifacts. Playing Natural State over Appetite as far as the numbers here, because Natural State is just quicker and we prioritize cards that cost less. 2 Plummet and 2 Clip Wings, I'm splitting that there, because I want to be able to target Smuggler's Copter, but I also want to be able to have another way of taking out Emrakul. And sometimes Clip Wings can hit an Avacyn or, you know, a Smuggler's Copter too. So Clip Wings isn't too bad. And then, you know, we're finishing up the playset of Dead Weight. That seems pretty obvious against aggro. And then Swarm Surge, I couldn't find room for it in the main deck, although it would be a fine main deck card. You could play it over Unnatural Endurance. But I find Unnatural Endurance to be better as far as versatility and being able to shirk off removal, you know. But against decks where we just want to win even quicker, you know, we want to go way up under all of Control's removal, then Swarm Surge can be a pretty good card because with 3 creatures out, we end up dealing like 10 or more damage pretty easily. And here are the power rankings right here. A final score of 54, but don't let that bug you. The score looks a little bit low. It's because it doesn't really score well on traditional sort of my scoring model here. You know, it's because it's bad in categories that it doesn't really care about. It's a budget deck, so it's going to have low power. It doesn't have a whole lot of synergy in it, you know, it doesn't care. It's not very versatile. It does the one thing very, very well. It's not very resilient, which is probably the worst thing about the deck. Just don't overextend against decks that you think might have a, you know, board sweeper. Just don't play like 8 creatures. You know, you'll be okay if you just play smart against those control decks. But the things that we want to be pretty good in, we're pretty good in. We're very, very high in offense, extraordinarily high in speed. But after that, you know, 4th or 5th turn, if we haven't won yet, things start getting harder. Just play smart. The 54 is kind of low, don't get me wrong, but this deck can win by turn 4 or 5 some of the time. So try it out. Let me know how you feel. For $8, I feel like this is one of the better decks we could build at a extraordinarily low budget right now. But for now, I'm tapped out. If you enjoyed the content, hit the thumbs up button. It takes a second and helps me a lot. And then sub if you're new so you get all the deck techs and stuff. I do top 10s. I do spoiler videos. So sub. You know, I'm trying to get to 50K and we can totally do it like before the end of the year. I know we can do it. I believe in us, right? Anyway, I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.